Rosh Hashanah is a complex holiday. That doesn't mean to say others aren't, but Rosh Hashanah is definitely complex. And I'd like to start by reviewing a certain aspect of the day which I don't think is discussed much, and that is the emotions of the day. My Rebbe Zatzal, the Boston Rebbe, stressed that the Torah is a Torah of emotion, in addition to principles and ideas and philosophy and ethics and performance of commandments. It's also a ideology of emotions. Certain emotions are prescribed for certain circumstances, used in certain ways. And when you chart the emotions of Rosh Hashanah, you can see the complexity, I think, expressing itself. So, first of all, you prepare for any holiday. You get a haircut. Many people go to mikveh. Even those who don't go regularly during the rest of the year, but they go before each of the holidays. And you prepare banquets for the day, and you have people gather at the meals in groups of people who love one another and friends with one another. You go to shul at night. The prayer is only moderate length. It's serious. It's clearly serious. There's nothing joyous about it, nothing really happy about it. It's serious. Then you come home to the holiday banquet, and it's a banquet, and you have the finest foods, drink, songs, Divrei Torah are said. If you happened upon the meal not knowing the background, you'd be able to tell whether this was Shavuos or Pesach or just people celebrating holiday. Then you go back to shul in the morning. The mood is very serious, almost solemn. There's a sense of the august. The prayers describe all sorts of deep philosophical ideas. One chief among them is judgment. That creates a mood of seriousness and the time being consequential. Things are happening now, they're going to have effects over the coming year. And personally serious because the record of the previous year is being judged for each of us. We'll speak about the Torah reading in a little while, but I just mentioned that on the first day you read about the birth of Isaac. On the second day you read about the sacrifice of Isaac. Isaac is prominent here. That's not a mistake, it's not an accident. Then you start with blowing the shofar. Really, the shofar should be blown and is blown during the Musa service. That was the reason why they preceded it by the blowing before the service starts. Blowing the shofar is, I would say, as focused and serious a moment as you have any time during the year. As we have spoken about, it announces God's presence, and it initiates the time when He's closest to the Jewish people. Then comes the Musa service, which again repeats the basic skeleton of the other services, but has much more elaborate. It's the longest by far of any Musa service, silent prayer. 3 august themes: God's kingdom over the world, and a sweep of Jewish history from the past to the future, and the idea of blowing the shofar, what it's supposed to signify, And in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, there are prayers which are, if you take them seriously, are really frightening. The decisions are being made now for the coming year: war and peace, life and death, health and sickness, wealth and poverty. It's all is being decided now. So the mood in general during the prayer, and the prayers are very long, 6 hours, 7 hours. Then you come home, and it's again a festive meal. The mood changes abruptly and significantly. You sing songs, and you have a wonderful repast. And then you go to Tashlich, which is a symbolic ceremony of casting aside your sins, and you go to a place which at some time during the year has water. Doesn't have to have water when you go. Don't have to say hello to the fish. And while the poetry in doing it is serious, it's often in a rural setting, and you're there with a large group of people. So the day has varying moods, and we need to discover what principles those moods embody. Now, the period of time has various titles. One is Yomim Noroim, awesome days. I think here the idea is not that the days are awesome, but that they are the days in which we are in a state of awe. We are full of awe during those days. That some, as a suffix, can mean full of. The days full of awe. Because the holiday is called Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. And by the way, this is a footnote on a footnote. The world was not created 5,800 years ago on Rosh Hashanah. Even though we say, Hey Yom Hara Olam, this is the day in which the world was conceived, and so on and so on. Today, let's just say yesterday in Israel, the 25th of Elul, that's when the world was created. What happened in Rosh Hashanah is that order was created and commanded and sinned and was judged. We, Boston Hasidim, have a custom, I don't know how widespread this is, that each morning now we read from the first verses of Genesis, first chapter of Genesis, the verses of each day, because it's the anniversary of that day of the creation. When it comes to the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read the verses of Shabbos. And that carries a very deep message, because the whole of the creation up to, but not including Adam, is just prelude, it's just backdrop, it's just stage setting, it's just an environment which, without Adam in it, has no function, no significance. This is based on a Mishnah in Sanhedrin with a commentary of the Maharal. The Mishnah there is instructing us how to warn witnesses in a capital case. They're going to give testimony from which someone may die. And the Mishnah tells us to explain to them several things, but one of which is, why was Adam created singular? So that he could say, the whole world was created for my sake, because he was the only one there. So too, should understand that each person should say, for my sake the world was created, and you are now giving testimony which may result in the death of someone who could say, the world was created for my sake. So be careful. Be careful. You're about to do something very serious. Ask the Maharal the obvious question, when Adam is the only person, he could say, the world's created for me because he's the only one there. Suppose he has 10 compatriots, 100, 1,000, 1 million, 1 billion, 8 billion. How can anyone say, for my sake, the world was created, when there's all the rest of us around? Maharal answers the question as follows. And again, this is politically incorrect, but we're not apologizing for that. I'm just advertising it. The world without an Adam is worthless. It's like stage setting without a performance, without a play being enacted. Put one person into it, and the whole of creation becomes meaningful, significant, valuable. A human being is the kind of creature who can change a meaningless environment into a meaningful and valuable environment. That's the kind of creature that a human being is. And now you witnesses are giving testimony which might result in the death of such a creature. That's a very significant action that you're performing. So the numerical size of the human group has nothing to do with the nature of each human being as something which could confer meaning and significance on a whole universe. So, really, in a certain sense, Rav Desta talks about this in metaphysical terms, in a certain sense, the history of the world begins on day 6. Because the history of the world is the history of humanity in the world. Through day 5, you don't have any human beings. That's just backdrop. It only becomes significant because it contributes to the drama that the human being will play out. So that's really what Rosh Hashanah commemorates, the creation of Adam. Now, judgment, justice, so it's called Yom HaNorah, it's full of awe, because this is the origin, and it's the sources compare it to a person who's running some kind of enterprise. It could be a country or a business or something. Periodically, you do an assessment. How far have we come? What have we accomplished? What have we failed at? What does we need change? And make plans for the coming future. The Creator does it on a yearly basis. What's happened in the past year, and what plans we're going to make for the coming year. So, the process of judgment is a process of reviewing the progress of the world towards its intended goal, assessing the role that each one has played in that process, positive or negative, or for almost all of us mixed, and then reacting to the ways in which we've integrated with that process by what's going to happen in the coming year. So this is coming from the Creator of the universe, and it's crafting the themes of the coming year in terms of our past performance and to accomplish what needs to be done as the next stage. That's one way of expressing what's awesome about the days. As I said, including life and death. Then there's the idea of tshuva. Sarah should make tshuva, the 10 days of tshuva. So here, I mentioned to you when we were studying the Rambam, that when a person performs a transgression, tshuva is the way in which he deals with it. And it's a mitzvah to do tshuva, and a responsibility. But if you delay doing tshuva, as long as you don't go past Yom Kippur, then you are credited with doing the mitzvah, and of course it takes care of the transgression. But a transgression in January, doing tshuva in February, there's no guarantee that the tshuva in February will have an effect. No guarantee that Hakadosh Baruch Hu will respond to the tshuva by awarding the result that tshuva is designed to incorporate, except for mitzvah saseh. Okay, that's for the aficionados. Yom Kippur, it's immediate, it's instantaneous. And the picture is that when a person performs a transgression, he takes a step back away from God, and God takes a corresponding step away from him. When he does tshuva, he goes back to the place he was in, but God is still distant. He has to close the distance from his side. And that may not happen immediately. From the 10 days, when starting from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, God takes his step first, even before we do tshuva. So that when we take our step, we're automatically connected again. So it's an awesome time in that respect. It's the 10 days of tshuva. What you have to hear in that is not just an obligation to do tshuva, but that the tshuva is immediate. It's immediate because he takes his step forward before we take our step forward. which is not the commitment during the rest of the year. So Rosh Hashanah is really a time when one should feel prepared for a meeting. It's a meeting. Because Baruch Hu invests his presence, and makes his presence palpable for the 10 days in a way that's not true for the rest of the year. So, when you go to shul in the morning and realize that this is called a mikdash ma'at, like a miniature of what the temple was, and you're going there with a minyan, so the Kodesh Baruch Hu also comes there and comes there, waits for you for the davening. Still, coming to shul on Rosh Hashanah is a much more awesome experience, because the closeness the Kodesh Baruch Hu has to us during these 10 days is not matched by any other time during the year. So it's not just the themes of the prayers, and you understand them intellectually, and you thereby experience those themes. It's not intellect driven in that way, although the intellect plays a role, but it's relationship driven, where the way in which the relationship between the Creator and his creatures is expressed during that time is a different mode of relationship. What is this like? It's like the way the idea of tefillah, the idea of prayer is understood based on the Rambam. This comes from Brisker sources, that when you're standing in prayer, you have to be conscious of standing in direct interaction with the Creator of the universe. It's like going into the palace and being out into the throne room and standing before the king on the throne. That is the hefts of prayer. That's what prayer is. A person who loses track of that isn't praying. A person who loses track of that idea, who imagines himself someplace else, his mind drifts, and so forth and so on, isn't praying. All the other ideas that you're supposed to have in mind while you're praying are how you do it. They're the adverbs and adjectives of prayer. But the noun of prayer is knowing you're standing before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In a certain sense, the noun of the 10 days for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is standing before Hashem. That's the noun. And that starts on Rosh Hashanah. So you come to shul, you're coming for that meeting. The blowing of the shofar is the announcement of the presence of Hashem in our midst, so that you have that consciousness. These things have, I would say, miniature echoes during the year, but this is the main performance of it. Some of you are aware, Friday night, when we come to Mizmor Dovid, I think it's the 30th Psalm, if I'm not mistaken, we all stand up. Almost every congregation in the world stands up at that time. Why do we stand up? So if you look at Lechadoidi, the word Lechadoidi say, "Come, my beloved, to greet the bride. Let us accept the presence of Shabbos. Come, my beloved." Who's talking to who? Well, the word in Hebrew is Dodi. Dodi comes from the Song of Songs. Dodi is the king. So it's the female in the Song of Songs who's addressing the king. Let's go together out to greet the Shabbos. So that means that the king is there in the room with you. When did he come in? He came in when you said Mizmor David. That's why you stand up. You stand up because that's the psalm which expresses being in the presence of the king. This is what the Arizal says. So you have it there also. When you stand up for Mizmor David, you think, okay, he's here. And then you say Lechadoidi as an invitation to go out. So that we do have this idea of welcoming Hashem's presence from time to time, but it can't compare to the sense of Rosh Hashanah. Now, The name for God as performing judgment and justice is Melech, which is roughly translated as king. I'll explain why it's rough in a minute. In fact, the third blessing, instead of ending it with Hakel HaKadosh, the holy God, we end it with HaMelech HaKadosh, the holy king. So that the aspect of God as king is paramount. Now, if you take that seriously and you identify the idea of king with judgment and justice, this can create a certain conflict. Because a great deal of the prayers that we recite on Rosh Hashanah are pleas for mercy. And strictly speaking, when the current theme is judgment and justice, mercy is not relevant, because mercy always contradicts. It always contradicts justice. The famous Medrash says that God first thought to create the world with strict justice. All of Moshe Rosa, all of it did. Saw it couldn't stand, so Shitev imo midas harachamim. He associated with justice the quality of mercy. So what does that mean? That means pure justice, and the world's not going to stand. You put mercy in, and then it will stand. Why? Because now you won't have pure justice. That's why. You know, if it was just going to be concerning the weather or the tides, that wouldn't help. Pure justice is going to destroy it. So if you put mercy in to preserve it, it means pure justice isn't going to be done, because mercy contradicts strict justice. But now, if you have a day that's dedicated to justice, how can you ask for mercy if it's a contradiction? And by the way, that's why Isaac is so prominent on Rosh Hashanah. In that respect, it's his holiday, because Isaac embodies and represents pure justice. Midas hadin. So the answer to that question, recently I discovered another answer, but an answer to that question is this, that justice, as important as it is only the vice president of the corporation. Justice exists because the president wants it to exist. And therefore, justice is limited by the project that the president represents. Who's the president? President loving kindness. Olam chesed yiboneh. King David says in the Psalms that the world is built out of loving kindness. There's one goal, one theme, one purpose only. It's all loving kindness. If you see anything in the corpus of the creation that isn't labeled loving kindness, then you have to know that loving kindness dictates that it should be there for the purposes of loving kindness, because nothing else can get in. Because there is only one theme, one goal, and one motivation. It's loving kindness. So, when you have a day dedicated to din, to strict justice, you have to ask, okay, but what does loving kindness want with this day? Because din can't stand on its own. That's why we say Avinu Malkeinu, always Avinu first and Malkeinu second, our Father first, our King second, because he's only king as Father. King is what the Father does from time to time to move forward the purposes of being a father. It's not an independent role. It's not an independent principle. So, when the king is going about administering justice, and we feel that we're going to be judged and come up short, we're going to be judged and condemned, we can say, excuse me, Vice President, but I'm addressing my next email to the President, and well, you can always approach the President, because he's running the show. So the appropriateness of asking for mercy is because strict justice is only the Vice President. Now, that I think explains what we read in the Torah on the 2 days. We read the first day, the birth of Isaac, Abraham's son. You read that Isaac comes into the world as a production of Abraham. That's acting out just what I just told you. Abraham is loving kindness, and loving kindness gives birth to strict justice. That's its origin, and therefore that's its limitation. And the second day expresses this theme in an even more dramatic manner, where loving kindness almost destroys justice, almost sacrificed. And the idea is that the sacrifice of justice on the altar of loving kindness is conceivable. It's called off at the last minute for various reasons. But it's conceivable, and Abraham passes the test because he's prepared to sacrifice Isaac. So that very vividly sends the message that justice is secondary and loving kindness is primary. I think the two readings, Torah readings, very powerfully express this idea. Now, when you know you're coming before the king who is your father, you feel very differently about the judicial process than you would if the king were a stranger. It's your father who's using strict justice on occasion, in a particular dimension, temporarily, in order to do the best for you that can be done. So, in a good parent-child relationship, even when the parent has to restrict the child feels that this is something that's being done for his good, for his benefit. And although he may not like it and he may try to avoid it, it will not provoke rebelliousness. It's a little bit like administering medical procedures which are painful, where even though the child's afraid of the pain, may want to run, but he doesn't hate his parents for making him healthy. When he's old enough to understand that this contributed to his health, then he realizes that they were really benefiting him. So the confidence and the happiness of the meals and the joy, by the way, there is a mitzvah of simcha on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. People don't appreciate this often because it isn't in the text of the prayers the way it is for Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot. But there's a legal proof to it, because a person who, Rahman al-Tzlan, is an ovel, he's mourning for the loss, let's say, of a parent. And the mourning period has 3 sections. There's 7 days, and then there's 23 more days, which make it up to 30, and then there's another 10 months, another 11 months to make it for a year. If the mourning starts and Rosh Hashanah comes in the middle of the period, let's say on day 4 of the first 7 days, the last 3 days are canceled. He moves straight into the Shloshim period. If he's in the Shloshim period, the rest of Shloshim is canceled, he goes into the final year period. He has to go out the dates, but the quality of performance is relieved. That's only done because there's a mitzvah of simcha. Mitzvah of simcha applies to all the holidays. So the way in which you can express simcha is through the confidence that I'm in the hands of my Father who wants the best for me, and sometimes the best for me may require something that's painful, but I know that I will come out of it better. So that's where the mixture of emotions comes. Now, having said that, this fits together also with another idea of the day. When you pray, the way the Midrash puts it is, God is sitting on the throne of justice, but there's another throne. That's the throne of mercy. And what we are doing on Rosh Hashanah is supposed to motivate the transition from the throne of justice to the throne of mercy. Because mercy is always available, because above those 2 thrones is the origin, which is loving kindness. That's the most you can hope for in Rosh Hashanah. The most you can hope for in Rosh Hashanah is mercy. Utterly unlike Yom Kippur, which we'll speak about week after next in Mitzvah Hashem. In Kippur, you can hope for atonement, for kapara, for cleansing, for ridding yourself of the consequences of the past. That's not what's going on in Rosh Hashanah. What's going on in Rosh Hashanah, I would say, is stage 1, where at least what strict justice would require as a response to failure is being delayed and modified, and being supplemented by other aspects of inspiration. Let me give you an example of what I mean. This is something which is perhaps an insight into child rearing, which I haven't heard in other contexts besides the Torah context. We do hear the phrase, punish the action, don't punish the child or the person. How do you hear that illogically? Person isn't the criminal, he's done something wrong. But how do you do it? How do you express the fact to the child that you're punishing his action but not opposing him, not condemning him? So here's a way. Imagine this happens to, I think, every parent. A child gets wild, and you tell him you can't be with other people when you're wild like this. You have to go to your room. So you put him in his room. He's going to be there for a half hour. And then you say to him, by the way, you're in your room, all alone. Here's a book that you might like. Now, the child thinks, what? I did something wrong. You're punishing me. You hate me. You're against me. You're trying to hurt me. And you give me an interesting book to read? And the answer is yes. You have to be in your room because you're disturbing other people. And we want you not to do that. And we're not changing that. You're going to be in your room. But having put you here, knowing that it's a punishment, having put you here to save the other people the disturbance that you were making, I don't want you to suffer. Here, have something good to read. That's a way of communicating the idea that I'm punishing the action and not the person. I haven't cut off my relationship with the person. I haven't cut off my caring for the person. This is illustrated in a famous incident in the Torah, which I wouldn't say it's celebrated that it's so, but it is so when you think about it. Miriam speaks Lashon Hara about her brother Moshe to Aaron, and she's punished with temporary leprosy. And God says, send her out of the camp. Leper can't be in the camp of the Jewish people for a week. And then the Torah says, and the people didn't travel for the week that Miriam was outside the camp. Okay, they didn't travel. They only traveled when the cloud went up off the tabernacle and moved, and they had to move. So it means that God didn't ordain any travel during that period. So the Chazal asked, why is that? He said, because God was paying her back for something that she did. When Moses was put in a basket at the edge of the Nile, she was there and she waited to see what would happen. And when Pharaoh's daughter took interest and took the basket and opened it up, she was there. When Pharaoh's daughter saw that there's a child there, is crying, and he's an infant and needs to be nursed, and she's looking for someone to nurse. So then Miriam presents herself and says, I know someone who could do it. I know a Jewish woman who's very capable and prepared to nurse the baby. His mother. She doesn't say that, and then she arranges that they should be back together. So the Chazal say, you waited by his basket to be there for him and to do something to save him. The Jewish people will now wait for you while you're expelled outside the group. Fine. But there's 40 years in between. No, more than that. We're not talking about 120 years in between. From Moses' birth until its incident in the wilderness. Couldn't God have found any other time to reward her for the wonderful thing that she did? So the answer, I said this myself on the basis of my own understanding, but I saw later that Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, said it. That's how I know that's right. He said, because I'm punishing you now. Now I want to reward you. Because I want to send the message that I'm punishing your action, which was wrong, it needs to be punished, but I'm not disconnecting from you. I'm not punishing the person, I'm punishing only the action. And I do that by giving a reward at the same time. I think that's a very, very profound idea, and it should be part of our practice with children, without question. So, when you think of that as the father who's punishing and communicating that, so then you have an idea of how you can have the confidence that we have on Rosh Hashanah. Now, this idea, which I just told you, expresses itself in Rosh Hashanah in a slightly different form, in a very powerful way. I mentioned 10 minutes ago that the word melech, which we translated as king, the Jewish concept of melech may not exist anywhere else in the world. I obviously haven't looked at 126 cultures, but it's a quite unique concept. The word melech in Hebrew means that the people give the authority to the king. The people give the authority to the king. Som tasimu lech hamelech. You shall place upon yourselves a king. That's what the verse says. There is an expression, a melech below am. There's no king without a nation. That's not the inside of a 6-year-old. Let's see, king is king over something. What does he have to be over? He's got to be over a nation. So I guess there can't be a king without a nation. No, that's not the idea. It's the idea that the people accepting him as king make him king. If the people don't accept him, he's not king. He could be a ruler, he could be a dictator, he could be an autocrat. There are all sorts of words for that in Hebrew, moshel and dabar. But melech isn't like that. Ein melech below am. The am makes him into the melech. By the way, this is reflected in a very important halacha. People to whom you owe honor usually can forego the honor. They can tell you, I know that you're required by Torah law to treat me in such and such a way, but I don't need it from you, and for my money you don't have to do it. Parents can do that. Torah teachers can do that. The king can't do that. King can't do that because showing the king honor is how you make him into the king. And the pasuk says, "Som tasimu lech hamelech." You are obligated to put him as a king over you. He can't relinquish your responsibilities to the Creator. You're not doing it to him because of who he is. You're doing it to him because God said, "Place a king over you." So he can't relieve you from your responsibility to treat him with honor. Okay, this is true all of the time. When you make a blessing and you speak of God as Melech HaOlam, you're not just reciting a fact. You're performing the function. When you say Shema, and we recognize God as King, the language of Chazal is exquisite. The yoke of the kingdom of heaven. What about that yoke? Do we recognize it, acknowledge it, perceive it, confirm it, admit it? No. We place it on our necks. Kabbalas, O Malchus Shamayim. That's a whole different concept. You're putting the yoke on your neck. That's what makes him king. So when you say a blessing, you say Melech HaOlam, you have to think, I'm acknowledging him as Melech, and that makes him Melech. Okay, this is a performance that we do all year long, every day, in myriad ways. Rosh Hashanah is called, in the literature, the inauguration day. That's when we are figuratively placing the crown on Kodesh Baruch Hu's head. Placing the crown on his head. We do it because we understand it. There will come a time when the rest of the world will join us in doing that. In the meantime, that's what we do. Now, there's a famous question asked in the name of Yisrael Salanter. We have Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is the day when you're being judged as you are. Yom Kippur is a day of process where you can change yourself. You can rid yourself of your liabilities in the past, but not on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, you're being judged as you are. Wouldn't it make more sense to reverse the order? Start with Yom Kippur. Cleanse yourself. Once you've cleansed yourself in a new condition, then come before God to be judged. Wouldn't that be much more reasonable outcome? When you're judged, you'll be judged clean instead of judged before you're clean. So there are two answers to that question. The simple, somewhat bitter answer is, if you had Yom Kippur first, you wouldn't take it seriously. You need Rosh Hashanah, 2 days, the whole lead up, the solemnity of the time, blowing the shofar, everything else, prepare you for the struggle of Yom Kippur. We'll talk about that in Hashem before Yom Kippur. But the deeper message here, I shouldn't say a deeper message here, is this. Because Baruch Hu says, I want you to crown me king before you're clean, before you're purified, before you've done tshuva and been cleansed, before that, with the stained clothing of all of your transgressions, I want you to crown me king. That sends a very powerful message of the same type that I mentioned 6 minutes ago. The message is, I'm committed to you, I believe in you, I have an unbreakable relationship with you, no matter what you do. No matter what you do, I'm committed to you. I'm committed to investing in you. And I'm committed to our relationship, to the extent that even though you haven't gone through Yom Kippur, and you haven't achieved forgiveness for the many things that you've done wrong, I still want you to put the crown on my head. It's that mixed message. It's a day of judgment. And yet, in a day of judgment, where we will be found wanting in a variety of ways, still, because Baruch Hu wants us to have this august, enormously significant performance, which expresses the uniqueness of his relationship to us and the enormous position that we play in the administration of the universe. So I think this is beginning to see a little bit of the mixed messages that are in the themes of Rosh Hashanah. And for that reason, we have these different moments of expressing, on the one hand, confidence and even joy, and other times, and also the seriousness of the judgment. The Medrash says, who prepares for a trial of life and death by having a banquet? That's not, people aren't in the mood to do that. They're worried sick. They're rehearsing their lines to answer the prosecutor's questions, and so no, we take a haircut, and go to mikveh, and have a banquet, because as momentous as the process is, it's being operated by our Father, and our Father is the one who wants the best for us. That's the basic mix on Rosh Hashanah. Now, we have a phrase in Hebrew, "Hakol holech achar harosh." Everything goes after the head. Certainly when you're walking, you walk at a slight tilt, so to keep your balance. If you walk into a place, your face goes in first, and the rest of the body follows. And we talk about the front part of any moving object as its head. It's the beginning of the year. So, to a certain extent, the theme that you achieve on that day, the focus that you achieve, the elevation of that day can be a foundation for the rest of the year. There may be ups and downs, but that it's something which is, I talk about starting on the right foot. If the first move is a good move, then it's a tremendous impetus to keep the performance on a high level. I was a musician for many years. When you're learning new music, we used to be told, if you make a mistake and when you're learning it, you'll have to play it 10 times to undo the mistake. Better play it slowly and play it right. And then gradually speed up as you get more familiar with the music, more fluent with the music, but lay the foundation right. And it's much more efficient, much more powerful that way than if you have to correct the mistake. So Rosh Hashanah is a day on which you want to lay that foundation. I want to make one more remark, and then if there are questions, we can talk about it for a little bit. I've spoken about this a few times, and it's a general theme that progress is made gradually. I spoke about the Rambam several times, and there's Bali Tshuva, no, you don't go into full local, contemporary Torah observance, let alone 613 commandments, which aren't available to us. But immediately, it takes time, months, sometimes years, to get into a moderate, consistent performance. So gradual development is definitely the theme. And I remember consulting with my Rabbi Zatzal just to make sure that I had it right. I explained it with my sources, and he said to me, "You're right, but there's one exception. And that is from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. There, you should reach for the top. There, you should try to be as perfect as possible. Don't think about gradual development. Don't think about what your limitations are. Reach for the top. Yes, it's 10 days out of 365 on the average. And there will be, you'll slide back from there. But you don't know how far back you'll slide. You couldn't know that unless you try. So it's a rhythm that for almost all of the year, you think of where you are and how by tomorrow morning you'd like to be a little bit higher. And then comes Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, you want to reach for the top for those 10 days as best you can. And it's challenging because there are more responsibilities during those days. So in a certain sense, your general religious responsibilities are greater, and that puts more pressure on you. But you try to maintain that consciousness that, this is the significant time. So the closeness and the confirmation of the relationship that's implied by Rosh Hashanah, together with the idea of this being a foundation for the year to come and a time of judgment, gives the day a complexity, both in intellectual terms and in emotional terms, and that's what plays itself out in the way in which the day is lived, in the way in which the day is experienced. Questions? No? Okay, fine. We should be able to. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, you mentioned that when you punish someone, you punish his actions and not the person. But then, so just to know what makes the person, like what makes the person? What is the action?
What makes the person, you mean above and beyond his actions? I mean, your actions don't happen by accident. When an action happens, not because we were struck by lightning, it happens from your personality. It happens from your priorities. It happens from your values. It happens from your worldview. Right? That's far, far above your actions. Often things that you believe in don't ever get acted out because there's no opportunity. Often what you believe in doesn't get acted out because there's an interfering desire, and you say, I wish I hadn't done that, or that's not what I really want. We spoke about really wanting in the name of Harry Frankfurt. Your actions often do not express who you really are. And we talk about different cultures having different values. I said that idea is very, very minimal. It's much less than people make it out. And if you look at the actions in a society, that's not a necessary key to their values. They may just be doing it bad, maybe doing it wrong. They know it's wrong and they do it anyway. So there's much more to a person than his actions. Your actions express who you are to the extent to which they can be expressed externally. But there's always more to the person than there is to his actions. Just like there's more to an idea than you can put into words. It's the foundation of Jewish intellectual expression. You want to reach to the person also. You want to reach to the person also and give confirmation to the person. With a child, let's say of 8, he's not capable of being evil. He's capable of doing bad things. He's not capable of being evil because he's not making free choices. So there you have to reach into him and say, I know that inside you're not evil. I know that because an 8-year-old can't be evil. You may have faults and you may have character traits that have to be improved, but you're not evil. And that's how simultaneously with the punishment for the bad action, you have to express that vote of confidence in the child for his inner purity at that point in time, and later on for inner goodness. Okay.